Hi guys, and welcome to the next video on my channel. Now I've had a bit of a break, but I'm back now. Today's case is going to be on the Giggling Granny or Nannie Doss, and this was a serial killer case that shocked everybody that heard about it, because Nannie was actually came across anyway as a sweet, kind, caring old lady. No one would have suspected her as a killer, especially as most of her victims were actually her own family members. Other nicknames for the Giggling Granny included Arsenic Annie, the Female Bluebeard, the World's Jolliest Self-Made Widow, and the Lonely Hearts Killer. It's believed that she killed between 11 to 12 people, most being blood-related, between 1920 and 1954. And she was a woman motivated by greed, which will be a theme, especially in her later killings, that we'll talk about later on. Born Nancy Hazel on the 4th of November 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. Her mother was Louisa Holder and her father was James F. Hazel. Now, Louisa and Nannie both disliked James very much. He was an abusive, controlling alcoholic. And he told his family, particularly his daughter and his wife, what they could do, what they could wear, where they could go, and what people they could socialise with, and he would stop his children and his wife from going to certain social events, especially if they involved women. The children would quite often be pulled out of school to work on the family farm, and so when Nannie dropped out of school after 6th grade, none of her family really batted an eyelid, particularly her dad. Now, despite the fact that her dad was very controlling, he wasn't very protective of her. Apparently, Nannie had some very horrific things done to her in her childhood, and her father didn't believe her when she went to him about it. Also, at the age of 7, Nannie Doss suffered a severe head injury. She was travelling on a train with her family when the train suddenly braked, and she smacked her head on a metal pole, causing an injury to the front lobe of her brain. Psychologists actually link injuries in the front lobe of the brain to a shift or a change in personality. And although it's not believed that this caused Nannie to become a killer, that it's believed that this, coupled with years of psychological abuse, may have changed a shift in her personality or changed her life forever. In fact, after this injury, Nannie complained of headaches, depression and blackouts for years after. As a teenager, Doss dreamed of a perfect princess-style family life, and she would quite often read her mother's romance novels and romance magazines, particularly the Lonely Hearts column, where people would write in to find potential partners. It looks like from here that she was just really wanting that escapism from this horrible family life. She'd seen how her father treated her siblings, herself and her mother, and she wanted something different for herself. She wanted her future husband to treat her perfectly. Because of James's very controlling ways, Nannie had never really spoken or interacted with boys until she started work. And in her spare time at work, she would continue to read romance novels and romance magazines. At the age of 16, she started working at a local linen factory, and this is where she met Charlie Braggs. Charlie worked at the factory alongside looking after his mother, and the pair started dating. After 3 or 4 months of knowing each other, they were married. Doss believed she had found her perfect man, her Prince Charming, and she believed this was an escape from her abusive father, but she couldn't have been more wrong. After marrying, Charlie and Nannie moved in together into Charlie's mother's home, and her mother-in-law was just as an abusive alcoholic as her father was, and so was her partner, and he would quite often cheat on her as well. They had their first child in 1923, a child called Melvina, and then they went on to have 3 more children after this over the next 3 years. Nannie's life had become a misery. She didn't take to motherhood, and she had to look after her demanding mother-in-law, her children and her cheating, abusive husband, and so she turned to drink to cope with this and would quite often go out to bars to pick up random men. In 1927, the couple's last children was born, Florine, and shortly after this, the couple's 2 middle children mysteriously died, and this was put down by doctors as food poisoning. However, it would be revealed that Nannie actually killed her own children. Very chilling. Now, the motivation for this isn't really sure what it is, because she didn't really gain much from this financially, which you'll see was a theme in her later killings. But they do theorise that maybe this was early signs of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that properly, or MSBP. And this is a mental disorder where a caregiver makes up an illness or an injury for a person in their care, and this can be for many reasons, including attention or money, and it's classed as a form of child abuse. Researchers aren't really sure what causes this mental disorder, but one of the theories is that it's caused when a abuser is abused in their childhood. So could it have been that Nannie was injuring the children or trying to make them ill to get her partner's attention and it went wrong? Although a lot of people just believe she did it just to get revenge on her cheating husband. Charlie was actually convinced and suspected that Nannie had killed their own children, and so he made his escape, took the oldest child, Melvina, but strangely and bizarrely enough left behind his youngest child, Florian, and his mother. Not long after Charlie left, his mother dies, and Doss continues to live in that home for a year until Charlie returns home with his new girlfriend and Melvina. And Doss takes her 2 children and she goes to move in back with her parents. Charlie Braggs would be the only husband who would not be poisoned by Nannie. After this, looking to find her next perfect partner, she took to Lonely Heart ads again, reading romance novels and magazines. And she began speaking to some of these men who were writing into the Lonely Hearts magazine columns, and this is when she started speaking to 24-year-old Robert Harlison. And Robert wooed her with his poetry and his romantic letters. Doss thought she had finally found her Prince Charming, the perfect one, and she had struck lucky. And so at 23 years old, she married again to Robert Harlison. The couple moved in together in Jacksonville with Doss's 2 children. And again, Doss's dream of a perfect relationship was shattered when Harlison turned out to be an abusive drunk as well, much like her previous husband and her father. Despite this though, the two remained married for 16 years until Harlison's death in 1945. It's actually believed that Nannie killed her first 2 grandchildren, and when Melvina had children, rather than being the doting, caring grandmother you would expect a woman to be, this took a more sinister turn. Now, just a warning, if this might upset you hearing these things, if you are sensitive to things including children, just a pre-warning. Melvina's second child was a healthy baby girl who actually died not long after her death. And apparently Nannie took a hairpin or a hat pin and stabbed the child in the brain. And Melvina apparently saw this while she was in and out of consciousness. No proof was found to prove that this actually happened. Melvina had another child 2 years earlier, who ended up dying after being in his grandmother's care. And this was put down by doctors as asphyxiation by unknown causes. But weirdly enough, Nannie had actually taken out a life insurance policy on the boy a few months prior, and after his death collected a $500 life insurance payout, which would be around £6,500 dollars in today's money. On the 15th of September 1945, Harlison became ill and died. Doss later admitted that Harlison had come home drunk and raped her, and in an act of revenge, she had poisoned his whiskey the next day. He suffered for a week before he succumbed to his symptoms from the poisoning. His death was put down to food poisoning, and no one really asked many questions because of his alcoholism. Doss collected the life insurance money and she bought a plot of land and a house near Jacksonville. She would meet her next victim through the Lonely Hearts ads as well, and within 2 days of meeting Arnie Lanning, the pair were married. Lanning again was an alcoholic, which there seems to be a pattern with this. Was she subconsciously going for men like that? Was she striking unlucky? Or was this part of her plan so that nobody questioned them when they died? Instead, in this relationship, it was Doss who actually was distant. In 1950, after 2 years of marriage, Lanning mysteriously died after complaining of stomach cramps. Doss had poisoned one of his meals and he died shortly afterwards. Now, no questions were asked because his symptoms were very similar to that of the flu: fever, stomach pains, sickness, and it was believed that because of his alcoholism he had just succumbed to the flu. So no autopsy was performed and Nannie Doss got away with murder again. Lanning's house was supposed to go to his sister, but before she could get ownership, the house mysteriously burned down, and Doss collected all of the insurance money from the belongings in the house and went to live with her mother-in-law, who died not long afterwards. She then moved in with her sister, who was dying of cancer, and apparently Doss poisoned her own sister to speed the death and collected the life insurance money. She played the role of a caring, doting person, family person, to get away with her crimes. Now, Doss is also thought to have killed her own mother, and there's conflicting reports about this. Some say that Doss's mother had suffered a hip injury in 1953, and so Doss was looking after her and she killed her while she was in her care. But other sources say that Doss actually just killed her while her mother was up visiting. I'm not really sure, but either way the outcome is the same. Her mother was killed. Husband number 4 was Richard L. Morton, and this time she met him through a singles club in the local area. They married in October 1952, and then they moved in together in Richard's homeland of Kansas. Although he wasn't abusive like her previous partners, Richard was adulterous and he never once remained faithful to Nannie. And so when she found out about this, she poisoned him, much like her other husbands, and he too died complaining of stomach cramps. It was around this time that Doss is thought to have killed her own mother and possibly her father as well. Doss wasn't too bothered that she'd lost a husband because she already had her eyes set on another man in the area, Samuel Doss. He was to be her final victim, husband number 5. Despite her previous husbands, Samuel wasn't abusive or an alcoholic. He was kind and good-hearted. He was actually mourning the loss of his wife and 9 children, and he was a churchgoer, and he fell head over heels in love with Nannie. But Nannie found him painfully boring. There were to be no magazines or TV programmes unless they were for educational purposes. She wasn't allowed to read her romance novels or her romance magazines, and there was a strict bedtime of 9:30 p.m. every night. On top of this, Samuel was very strict with money and wasn't very generous with money when it came to Nannie. And so she up and left, but she soon returned after Samuel agreed to sign her into his checking account. She then began to play the role of the caring, doting wife again, and then she convinced Samuel to take out 2 life insurance policies on himself, with the sole benefactor being her. Not long after this, she would poison Samuel, but he wouldn't die straight away. He would spend a month in hospital recovering before returning home. And this is where Nannie made a mistake, because she decided to try and kill him again. And so when he got home, she poisoned him with either a coffee or a meal, depending on which source you read, and then he succumbed to the poison the second time round. And doctors found this very suspicious, so an autopsy was performed and high levels of arsenic and rat poison were found in Samuel's system. And then some of her other bodies were exhumed and they also found the traces of arsenic and rat poison. She was arrested in 1954 and she was only charged for Samuel Doss's murder, although she confessed to all of the other murders. She began blaming these murders on the brain injury that she got when she was 7. And she gained the nickname Giggling Granny because she spent her entire trial and her questioning laughing uncontrollably, and she made jokes about her husbands and the ways in which she killed them. She explained the killing of her husbands by saying that she was searching for the perfect mate, a real romance in life, and so when Nannie was done with one husband, she simply killed him, took the money and moved on to the next. Because most of her husbands had alcoholism or heart problems, no questions were really raised and it was all put down to natural problems or food poisoning and things like that. And because of her facade, this facade of a caring, kind woman, no one ever questioned anything. She was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 50 for killing Samuel Doss. In 1963, after serving 8 or 10 years in prison, depending on which source you read, Nannie died of leukemia, and many believe that she got leukemia from the high levels of poison she was exposed to. This case had red flags for psychopathic personality disorder, although apparently Doss later admitted that the laughing was all for show, it was an act, and she was just bored of life and was hoping she would be given the death sentence, although I guess we'll never really know. Apparently as well, during her questioning, she had one request, which was to read romance novels, and so they managed to coax the information and the confession out of her using those. Another thing is, during prison, she would also regularly ask the prison kitchen staff if they wanted help preparing meals, and obviously they refused, which is probably just a joke on her behalf, a kind of sick joke. So that's the end of the Giggling Granny serial killer case. This case was really tragic from start to finish, from her childhood to the killings all the way up to her death. I hope you found this video informative. Please subscribe and give it a like if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.